Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about one of the hardest truths you'll ever face the moment you were rejected by someone you loved deeply. The moment the avoidant turned cold, distant, detached, and made you feel like you never mattered. You tried everything to make it work. You reasoned with them, reassured them, gave them space, gave them love, gave them patience. But no matter how hard you tried, they walked away as if you were replaceable, as if the connection meant nothing. And that rejection cut deeper than words can describe. But here's what most people never tell you. That rejection was never about your worth. It was about their fear. And what they hope you'll do next is exactly what keeps their fear in control. Because when an avoidant rejects you, they're not trying to end the emotional connection. They're trying to control it. They want to create distance without accountability, space without consequence, and silence without guilt. They want you to stay emotionally tied to them, even while they walk away. And the way they make that happen is by triggering your self-doubt. Their rejection isn't closure, it's control. Because when an avoidant rejects you, it's rarely about ending the connection. It's about keeping power over it. It's about maintaining emotional distance, while still knowing you're emotionally invested. The rejection isn't meant to sever the bond, it's meant to shape it into something they can manage without feeling vulnerable. Avoidants fear closeness, because intimacy exposes the parts of themselves they don't know how to handle: their insecurity, their guilt, their buried need for love. So when they reject you, what they're really saying is, I can't handle the weight of being seen right now, but I still need to feel significant to you. They walk away physically, but emotionally, they still want to linger in your mind. They don't want to lose you completely, they just want to control the distance between you. That's why avoidant rejection doesn't come with closure. They rarely give you a clear ending. Instead, they leave things open-ended, unfinished, confusing. They'll say things like, I just need space, or it's not you, it's me, or I don't know what I want right now. Those phrases aren't closure, they're control. They keep you emotionally hooked, second-guessing, hoping, analyzing. They know that by keeping things vague, they maintain a sense of power. You start replaying every conversation, trying to decode what went wrong, wondering if there's still a chance. And while you're stuck in that confusion, they stay comfortably distant, knowing you're still emotionally orbiting them. That's how they protect their ego. They make you carry the weight of uncertainty while they escape accountability. Avoidants often appear calm after rejection because they're not actually detached, they're relieved. Distance makes them feel safe again. But deep down, they still crave your emotional attention. They want to know you're thinking about them, missing them, trying to understand them. That validation soothes their hidden insecurity. The irony is, even when they reject you, they still need your energy. They feed off your reaction, the messages you send, the pain you show, the effort you make to reconnect. Every attempt to reach them reassures them that they still matter. And that's why their rejection isn't about closure, it's about maintaining emotional control without commitment. For you, though, it feels like torture. Because you're left with questions, with emotional loose ends. You crave understanding. You want honesty, a conversation, something that brings clarity. But they can't give that because closure requires vulnerability, and vulnerability terrifies them. To close the connection cleanly, they'd have to face their fear of loss, their guilt, their responsibility in the breakdown. They'd have to admit that they cared, and that scares them more than losing you. So instead, they retreat behind silence, leaving you to seek closure in confusion. They gain peace by avoiding, and you lose peace by overthinking. That's the power dynamic they unconsciously create, and it's how they stay in control long after walking away. It's hard to accept that the rejection wasn't personal. You replay every moment, wondering what you could have done differently. You start believing that their indifference means you weren't enough. But here's the truth. Their rejection wasn't a reflection of your inadequacy. It was a reflection of their emotional limits. They rejected not you, but the depth of intimacy they weren't prepared to handle. Your presence triggered their unresolved fears, fear of dependence, fear of loss, fear of being needed. Instead of facing those fears, they ran. That's what avoidance does. It runs from the very love it craves. The reason it hurts so deeply is because they never gave you closure to heal. They left doors open so your mind would keep returning to them. They wanted to feel safe knowing that if they ever wanted to come back, you'd still be there. That's what makes their rejection manipulative, even if unconsciously so. It's a strategy built on silence, a way to maintain control without confrontation. But what they don't realize is that the power they think they're keeping begins to fade the moment you stop seeking answers from them. When you finally stop chasing closure, you break their control. Because closure doesn't come from their explanation, it comes from your understanding. It comes when you see the rejection for what it really was, an act of fear, not authority. It comes when you realize they didn't reject you out of confidence, they rejected you out of emotional immaturity. And the moment you stop waiting for them to make it right, the dynamic shifts. They lose the emotional grip they had over you. Their silence stops being power and starts being irrelevance. Avoidants reject to maintain control because control makes them feel safe. But love was never meant to be a game of control. It was meant to be a space of openness, reciprocity, and truth. Their rejection was their escape, not your ending. They hope to keep you trapped in confusion, but your clarity becomes the end of their control. Because the real closure isn't them coming back to explain, it's you realizing you never needed their approval to heal. When you see that truth, the rejection loses its power. The very thing they use to keep control becomes the reason you reclaim your strength. They hope your pain keeps you chasing, because as long as you're chasing, they never have to face themselves. Avoidants don't just reject you to end connection, they reject you to restore their sense of control. Deep down, they fear the vulnerability that comes with being loved, so they distance themselves before love feels too real. But even when they pull away, they don't want the emotional bond to break. They want you to keep proving that you care. They want you to keep reaching out, keep trying to fix it, keep showing them that they matter. That's what soothes their ego. Your pain becomes their reassurance. The very heartbreak they caused becomes their validation that they were significant to you. And that's why they secretly hope that even after rejecting you, you'll still chase them. For an avoidant, closeness feels threatening, but being desired feels safe. It feeds the part of them that craves importance without requiring emotional exposure. So when they sense that you're hurt and still holding on, it gives them comfort. It tells them that they still have power over your emotions. They may not consciously admit it, but your sadness keeps them anchored. It allows them to maintain distance while still feeling connected. They can disappear, but still feel relevant, because your energy continues to revolve around them. That's the paradox of the avoidant. They fear intimacy, but they also fear insignificance. They want to be wanted, but not needed. They want to be missed, but not responsible for anyone's pain. Your chasing fulfills that twisted balance perfectly. It keeps them emotionally fed without requiring accountability. That's why the avoidance rejection always leaves just enough hope to keep you hooked. They rarely say it's over completely. Instead, they leave it open-ended. Maybe someday. I just need time. I'm not ready right now. These phrases are emotional breadcrumbs, designed to make you wait, to make you keep caring, to make you question what you did wrong. They reject you but make sure the door isn't locked, because they don't want you to move on. They just want you to stay emotionally available from a distance. The pain you feel after rejection, the endless wondering, the sleepless nights, the urge to reach out, that's what they unconsciously depend on. It keeps them in the position of emotional superiority. They don't have to chase you, because you're still chasing them. They don't have to be vulnerable, because you're still carrying all the emotion they refuse to face. But what happens when you stop chasing is the beginning of their reckoning. When you no longer respond, when you stop showing up, when your energy no longer feeds theirs, something inside them starts to shift. At first, they'll feel relief, the illusion of freedom. But then the silence starts to echo, and they begin to feel the emptiness behind their control. The attention they once took for granted is gone. The validation they drew from your devotion fades. That's when the power dynamic starts to collapse. They can't feel superior anymore, because the game only works if both people are playing. Without your pursuit, their ego no longer has fuel. That's when they start to miss you, not necessarily out of love, but out of discomfort. They begin to realize that the peace they thought they wanted feels a lot like loneliness. Avoidants often come back not because they've changed, but because they can't stand losing the emotional control your chasing gave them. They'll reach out just enough to reignite your hope to see if you'll still respond, if you'll still feel something for them. But this is where your awareness becomes your power. Because the moment you understand that their rejection was never about your worth, you stop reacting from pain and start responding from strength. You stop chasing what doesn't reciprocate. You stop mistaking their silence for significance. And most importantly, You stop letting your heart be the place where their fear feels safe. The truth is, your pain was never meant to be proof of your love. It's not your job to show someone how valuable you are by how much you're willing to endure. Love isn't earned through suffering. It's given freely, reciprocated, and nurtured with presence. When someone rejects you and expects you to keep chasing, they're asking you to sacrifice your dignity to protect their ego. And you are far too worthy for that. So when they hope your pain keeps you chasing, give them silence instead. Give them distance. Give them the peace they never gave you. Because that silence forces them to confront what they've avoided their whole life, the realization that their control only ever worked because you allowed it to. When you reclaim that power, you flip the dynamic completely. They lose the comfort of your attention and are left with the discomfort of their own emptiness. And that's the moment they start to see the truth that your absence hurts more than your love ever did. Because the love they once took for granted disappears when your chasing ends, and the ego they used to hide behind begins to break when your pain no longer feeds it. The silence they give you is a test, not peace. When a dismissive avoidant withdraws, they make it look like they're calm, detached, and unaffected. But underneath that exterior, they're watching every move you make. Their silence is a strategy. It's not a break for healing. It's a test to measure how deeply you're still attached. They want to see if you'll reach out first, if you'll panic, if you'll beg for answers, or fight for the connection. It's their way of confirming that they still matter, that even when they disappear, you're still emotionally anchored to them. For the avoidant, silence is control, disguised as composure. They want you to feel the discomfort of the void they create, because that discomfort keeps you chasing. The avoidant uses silence the same way they used emotional distance throughout the relationship to maintain safety without having to communicate vulnerability. They tell themselves they need space, but what they're really doing is watching from a rattle, distance to see if you'll break it. If you reach out, it reassures them that they still have influence over your emotions. It tells them that even in absence, they still have significance. That's what they crave: relevance without responsibility, emotional closeness without emotional risk. They can't handle being fully seen, but they also can't handle being forgotten. So, their silence becomes a power play, a psychological checkmate that keeps you wondering, worrying, and waiting. You feel that silence deeply because you've been conditioned to interpret it as punishment. When someone you love goes quiet, your mind fills in the blanks. You assume you did something wrong, that you pushed too hard, that if you just give them enough space, they'll come back. What you don't realize is that their silence is not about you, it's about their fear. It's a shield that protects them from the vulnerability of communication. They know that by saying nothing, they say everything. They make you do the emotional work for both of you. You start replaying every conversation, crafting imaginary scenarios where you fix things, while they stay comfortably detached, never having to confront their own avoidance. And here's the part they don't expect: your silence can be louder than theirs. Because when you stop reacting, when you stop chasing, when you stop giving their withdrawal meaning, that's when the power dynamic flips. Avoidants use silence as a way to test your emotional dependence. But when you respond with peace instead of panic, they lose control. They start to wonder why you're not reaching out, why the energy they were so sure of has vanished. Their illusion of superiority begins to crack. They start to feel the very discomfort they were trying to make you feel. That's when their silence starts haunting them, because for the first time, it's not power, it's isolation. Avoidants often believe they can pull away and come back whenever they want. They assume you'll always be there, waiting, forgiving, understanding. That's why their silence isn't meant to end the story. It's meant to keep the door open on their terms. But when you match their silence with your own strength, when you no longer chase or explain or justify, you teach them something they've never experienced before: emotional consequence. They start to realize that not everyone waits forever, that their avoidance doesn't make them untouchable, that their silence can actually lead to real loss. And that realization hits harder than any confrontation ever could. You see, real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from clarity. The avoidant confuses silence with peace because they've never experienced healthy communication. They think staying quiet protects them from pain, but it only keeps them stuck in fear. You, on the other hand, grow through that silence. You learn to sit with your emotions instead of chasing. Someone who hides from theirs You start to see that your worth was never meant to be proven through pursuit. You start to realize that real love doesn't test you through absence. It meets you with presence. Their silence is a test, but it's one you don't have to take. You pass it not by breaking it, but by outgrowing it. By recognizing that silence is not love, it's avoidance. By understanding that their withdrawal says more about their fear than your value. By choosing peace, not as a reaction to their absence, but as a reflection of your growth. When you stop letting their silence control your emotions, you become everything they're afraid to be: free, self-assured, and emotionally grounded. That's when their silence stops feeling powerful. It becomes empty, meaningless, and irrelevant. Because the truth is, the silence they thought would break you becomes the silence that finally sets you free. Your silence is the one thing they can't control. Because and after, avoidance sense of emotional power depends on your reaction. They pull away, go cold, or disappear, not because they're at peace, but because they know that silence triggers your anxiety. They've seen what it does to you: the endless overthinking, the messages you type and delete, the sleepless nights spent wondering what you did wrong. They expect that your discomfort will pull you back toward them, that your need for clarity will outweigh your self-respect. It's a pattern they rely on, a predictable dance where they lead by retreating and you follow by pursuing. But the moment you choose silence over reaction, you shatter that entire illusion of control. You take back the emotional balance that they've been using to their advantage all along. When you stop responding, it disarms them. It confuses them. Because they've learned to define their worth by the effect they have on others. The avoidant thrives on emotional distance precisely because it keeps them in control of the narrative. They believe that as long as you're the one reaching out, they hold the power. But when you stop chasing, you disrupt that story completely. Your silence forces them to confront something they've spent years avoiding: the consequence of their own behavior. The silence they once used as a weapon suddenly becomes a mirror, reflecting their fear, their emptiness, and their inability to connect. Avoidants fear vulnerability because it threatens their emotional armor. They use detachment as a form of safety, convincing themselves that if they never need anyone, they can't get hurt. But your silence flips that dynamic. It takes away their emotional safety net, the knowledge that you'll always be there to reach out first. Now, the distance they created starts to feel uncomfortable, even unbearable. They begin to wonder why you haven't called, why you haven't tried to fix things, why you're suddenly okay without them. That confusion eats at their sense of control. They start to feel the same uncertainty they once made you live with. This is the power of your silence. It's not revenge, it's reflection. It's showing them, without words, what it feels like to face the emptiness they've caused. It's giving them the one thing they've avoided their whole life: accountability. When they can no longer predict your reaction, they begin to question their assumptions. They start to replay the moments when you tried to communicate and they dismissed you, the times you opened up and they turned away. Your silence becomes a consequence, not a punishment. It's the emotional mirror that forces them to see the impact of their avoidance. But this silence is not about pretending not to care. It's about caring enough for yourself to stop explaining your worth. You're no longer trying to prove your love to someone who fears it. You're no longer chasing validation from someone who withholds it. You're choosing peace over chaos, dignity over desperation. And that choice changes everything. It takes incredible strength to resist the urge, to explain, to clarify, to defend yourself. But when you do, you reclaim your emotional energy. You stop being the one who always bridges the gap. You teach them, through absence, that love is not a one-way effort. The avoidant never expects silence from you. They expect emotion, reaction, pursuit. They expect you to fill the space they've created, because that space makes them feel powerful. But when you let that space exist, when you no longer fight to close the distance, their ego begins to crack. They start to feel the discomfort that comes with loss, the realization that control doesn't equal connection. They begin to see that silence doesn't protect them, it isolates them. And in that isolation, they finally meet the truth they've been avoiding. Love isn't something you can control. It's something you have to nurture, or it disappears. Your silence is not weakness, it's emotional mastery. It's the point where you stop playing the game and start standing in your worth. It's the calm that follows the chaos, the quiet power that says, I don't need to chase what already showed me it's running away. The avoidant doesn't know how to respond to that strength because it exposes the truth. They never controlled you. They controlled your reaction. And now that your peace has replaced your panic,